Over the years, there have been a lot of songs about cars, pink Cadillac, Little Deuce Coupe, to name two. So no surprise, someone like the great Roy Orbison.
It's easy to remember Roy Orbison for the voice. Otherworldly, flawless, almost angelic. But behind that voice was a man unraveling. And for decades, the mystery of who he really was stayed hidden beneath the sunglasses, the stage lights, and that haunting falsetto. Now, the truth has finally surfaced, and it's not the legacy fans hoped for. Because while the world fell in love with his sound, Roy quietly waged war against himself, with choices that would cost him nearly everything. But how did a shy boy from Texas become rock's most haunting voice? And why did that gift become his curse? The making of a haunted voice. The answer lies in the dust-swept plains of Depression-era Texas, where tragedy was already shaping the boy who would sing our pain. The Roy Orbison mystery is finally solved, and it isn't good, because to understand the man behind that voice, we need to go back, way back, to a place where hope was a hard sell, and joy wasn't handed out freely. Roy Kelton Orbison was born in Vernon, Texas, on April 23, 1936, right in the jaws of the Great Depression. Families were broke, dreams were small. But even as a toddler, Roy wasn't chasing baseballs or trying to be the loudest kid on the block. He was quiet, soft-spoken, kind of hard to read. But when his father gave him a guitar at just 6 years old, something changed. It wasn't just a toy, it was an escape hatch, a way out. By 8, Roy was already performing on a local radio station. Yeah, let that sink in. 8 years old. That's younger than most kids learn to ride a bike, and this kid was already crooning for an audience. Then came the move to Wink, Texas, and if you've never heard of it, that's kind of the point. Tiny oil town, flat land, hard winds, and even harder lives. But Wink gave Roy two things: endless loneliness and a stage. That isolation and silence, it soaked into his voice. It shaped it. It gave him this weird superpower. He could feel everything the audience was afraid to say. And he could sing it like he meant it. In high school, he formed his first band, the Wink Westerners. They played whatever they could. TV spots, honky-tonks, rodeos, basically anywhere people were willing to listen. And Roy didn't look the part of a rock star. He wore thick glasses, he was pale, awkward, and polite to a fault. But when he opened his mouth, game over. And eventually, someone noticed. By the late 1950s, Roy was in Memphis, recording under Sam Phillips at Sun Records, the same studio that launched Elvis Presley, Johnny Cash, and Jerry Lee Lewis. Roy was suddenly in the room with the heavyweights. But here's the catch. His early tracks at Sun didn't really take off. His voice was too strange, too emotional, too floaty.
Pretty woman, walking down the street, pretty woman.
So he left. It wasn't until he got to Monument Records, working with producer Fred Foster, that it clicked. And not just a little, it exploded. In 1960, he released Only the Lonely.
Only the lonely know the heartache.
And it was like the music world stopped and turned around. Nobody had heard anything like it. His voice didn't just sing the lyrics, it soared above them. Brooding, fragile, soaring up into a falsetto that felt like heartbreak had taken human form. And from there, the hits kept coming. But here's what most people miss. This wasn't just talent. It wasn't just studio magic or clever songwriting. There was something deeper happening, something painful, something Roy never fully talked about. But that bled into every syllable he ever sang. Because what was really behind that otherworldly sound? Why did it hit so hard? And why did it feel like Roy was singing not to us, but for us?
Whoa, whoa, Claudette. Yeah, Claudette.
Like he carried the sorrow, so we didn't have to. the voice that shouldn't exist. The truth about Roy's voice reveals the first piece of a devastating puzzle that would define his entire life. The Roy Orbison mystery is finally solved, and it isn't good, because the voice that made millions stop in their tracks, the one that could crack open your chest and stir something ancient inside you, it shouldn't have even existed. Let's start with the rumors, because the internet loves to create myths out of misunderstood genius. Some claimed Roy had undergone an experimental sinus surgery that altered his vocal cords and gave him that signature sound. But that's fiction. No medical record, no proof. Just the kind of story you invent when the real answer feels too unbelievable to accept. In reality, Roy Orbison's voice was something far stranger. It was natural, and it came with a few complications. From a young age, Roy struggled with breathing issues, especially while sleeping. He had chronic asthma and occasionally relied on oxygen to settle his lungs. But despite those limitations, or maybe because of them, he developed insane control over his breath. He trained himself to pull air in small, powerful bursts and then release it in long, perfectly tuned phrases. That kind of stamina, especially while singing high into the falsetto range, shouldn't be possible. But Roy made it feel effortless. He had a full 3-octave range. To put that in perspective, most professional singers get about 2 usable octaves. Roy could glide from a trembling whisper to an operatic cry, and still hold a vibrato like it was nothing. And what made it even more rare, he did it all without leaning into the tough guy energy that defined rock and roll at the time. Peter Lehman, a scholar at Arizona State University, once described Roy's voice as the first truly vulnerable sound in rock music. And when you listen back to songs like Crying or In Dreams, you hear it.
Candy-colored clown they call the Sandman tiptoes to my room every night.
There's no showboating, no strutting, just pure emotional confession. It's like he wasn't trying to impress you. He was just trying not to break. And then there's, Oh, Pretty Woman. Now that one had swagger, for sure, but listen closely. The lyrics sound confident, but the voice, still aching, still hiding something deeper. Even on stage, Roy was the opposite of what rock stars were supposed to be. He didn't move around much. He wore all black, barely spoke, and kept those dark sunglasses on like armor. He almost looked like a ghost up there. Still, mysterious, detached. But when the music started, it was like every wound he'd ever carried got a chance to sing. Bruce Springsteen later called him the voice of heartbreak, and Elvis himself once said Roy was the greatest singer in the world. That's not just flattery, that's recognition. Because Roy wasn't copying anyone, he was feeling everything. He turned agony into melody. He made loneliness beautiful. And yet, while the world fell for the voice, it missed the warning signs. Roy wasn't playing a part. He wasn't acting. That ache in his music, it wasn't a gimmick. It was real. That was the truth people kept overlooking. Because this wasn't just about talent. It was the sound of a man slowly unraveling, out in the open, one record at a time. And here's where it hits even harder. While Roy's voice was reaching hearts around the world, his own heart was about to be shattered in ways that would change everything. When tragedy becomes reality. June 6, 1966, the day Roy Orbison's songs stopped being performances and became prophecies. By the late 50s, Roy Orbison's voice had already earned him a spot among rock royalty. But behind the haunting vibrato and slick sunglasses was something far more intimate. His marriage to Claudette Frady. She was just 16. He was 21. And yet, despite the age gap, theirs wasn't some industry stunt marriage. This was real. They were young and in love, and Roy couldn't shut up about her. She became his muse, his anchor, and the reason he even wrote some of his earliest songs. One of them, literally named Claudette. He wrote it for her, about her, and you could feel it in the lyrics. There was something innocent and electric between them that grounded him in a world that was quickly spinning out of control. Together, they had 3 sons, Roy Duane in 1958, Anthony King in 1962, and Wesley in 1965. For a little while, Roy seemed to be living the dream, touring the world by day, coming home to the kind of family life most stars only pretended to have. But just when it looked like the man who sang about loneliness had finally outrun it, tragedy struck. And it didn't strike once. It came in waves. June 6, 1966. Roy and Claudette were riding their motorcycles through Gallatin, Tennessee. It was supposed to be a carefree afternoon, just 2 people blowing off steam and enjoying a rare moment off the road. But Claudette never made it home. A truck pulled out in front of her. She collided head-on. And just like that, Roy's muse, the woman who inspired his voice, was gone. The entire industry froze. But Roy, he shattered. You can actually hear it happen in the years that follow. His voice still beautiful, but now it felt like it was singing from the edge of a cliff. Because it was. In an interview not long after, Roy quietly confessed, "My heart is broken. I can't write about heartbreak." And you could tell. The songs that once came from imagination now came from memory, and not the kind you want to remember. But the universe wasn't done with him yet. Just over 2 years later, on September 14, 1960, Roy was overseas, touring in England, trying to lose himself in work. Back home in Hendersonville, Tennessee, his house caught fire. His 2 eldest sons, Roy Duane and Anthony King, were inside, trapped. Firefighters tried everything, but by the time the flames were out, it was too late. They didn't survive. Wesley, his youngest, had stayed with his grandparents that week, and thank God he did. But imagine that. Imagine losing your wife and 2 children in just over 2 years. How does anyone survive that? And here's where things get even stranger. That same house, the one that burned down and took Roy's boys with it, it was later bought by Johnny Cash. And rather than bulldoze the site, Cash planted an orchard, like he was trying to overwrite the sadness, to give something back to the ground that had already taken so much. After that, Roy disappeared. Not entirely, not publicly, but emotionally, spiritually, creatively. He just flatlined. And who could blame him? He tried to keep singing, but that trademark energy, that hope, it dimmed. The world still saw the sunglasses, the stage lights, and the gloved voice. But inside, Roy was stuck, paralyzed, frozen in the moment. The phone rang from Tennessee. His songs didn't change overnight, but the context around them did. Suddenly, Only the Lonely wasn't just a melancholy love song. It was a confession. Crying became unbearable. These weren't just performances anymore. They were prophecies. Like somehow, Roy had written his own future without realizing it, and now he had to live inside it. And this is what they don't put in the rock documentaries. They talk about the voice, the sunglasses, and the Elvis collabs. But what they skip is this: the raw, disfiguring pain that turned Roy Orbison from a performer into a haunted man chasing ghosts through every chorus. Because the Roy Orbison mystery, finally solved and isn't good, doesn't end with a big career downfall or a messy scandal. It's this: the way grief hollowed him out from the inside, quietly, and made him carry the weight of it in front of millions. Most people would have broken completely. But Roy? He kept going. And the way he did it, that part might be the darkest twist of all, because it meant surrendering to something far more dangerous than sadness, and it almost killed him. He didn't fall off the stage or spiral publicly. No rehab meltdowns or press scandals. Roy Orbison did something even worse. He hid in plain sight, and the mask he wore, it slowly devoured what little he had left. The slow-motion death. Roy Orbison didn't die in 1988. He began dying in 1966. One cigarette, one sleeping pill, and one emotionally numbing tour at a time. After the devastating losses of his wife, Claudette, and his two sons, Roy Orbison kept moving. Not forward, just moving. As if stillness meant having to feel everything he'd lost. Then, in 1968, during a tour in the UK, he met Barbara Jacobs. And something unexpected happened. She didn't fall for the rock star. She fell for the man behind the glasses. Barbara gave up everything, her home in Germany, her own path, to stand by Roy. They married in 1969, and by all accounts, she became his lifeline. The press called her his second chance, his anchor, but even the strongest anchor can't stop a ship from sinking if the hull's already cracked. They had two sons together, Roy Kelton Jr. in 1970 and Alexander in 1975. And for a little while, there was light again. But behind the smiles, Roy was terrified. Losing his family once had shattered him. Now, he lived in constant fear that it could happen again. So he did the only thing he knew how to do. He worked harder than ever. This is the part the tribute videos skip. From the age of 12, Roy was a chain smoker. Not casually, not a few during stressful times. We're talking 40 cigarettes a day for 4 decades straight. That's over 500,000 cigarettes by the time he turned 50. Think about that. 500,000 tiny fires chipping away at one of the most iconic voices in music history. But the nicotine was just part of it. He also leaned on prescription meds, popping sleeping pills to force rest and amphetamines to push through grueling travel schedules and late-night shows. That's not speculation. It's documented. Roy Orbison was juggling sedatives and speed in the same week, sometimes the same day. This wasn't the glamorous life of a rock legend. This was emotional triage. Barbara did everything she could to slow him down and convince him to care about his health. But Roy? He kept saying no. Touring gave him purpose. Performing drowned out the memories, and the longer he stayed on the road, the further he could stay from the past. Then, in 1978, the crash came. Triple bypass surgery. At just 41. That should have been a wake-up call, a hard stop. But not for Roy. He lit another cigarette and kept going. Poor diet, lack of exercise, and back-to-back shows in different countries. His voice still sounded angelic, but his body was aging like a man 20 years older. People around him were concerned, but they didn't have the full picture. Because Roy didn't show it, he'd smile, take photos, and then quietly pop another pill behind the dressing room curtain. His health was slipping, and yet he was more afraid of financial instability than his own arteries closing. That's the heartbreaking twist in the Roy Orbison mystery finally solved, and it isn't good. His obsession with work wasn't driven by greed. It was grief. Touring was his emotional anesthesia. Every sold-out concert was another layer of numbness. Another night not spent staring at empty chairs where his family used to sit. He wasn't chasing fame. He was running from ghosts. And just when it seemed Roy might fade away completely, something incredible happened. But here's the question. Was it a triumphant comeback or his final act of self-destruction? Triumph or tragedy? In 1987, Roy Orbison was back on top of the world. But those closest to him knew he was living on borrowed time. It all started with a haunting scene in Blue Velvet, when David Lynch dropped In Dreams right into the middle of a surreal nightmare. And just like that, a whole new generation discovered Roy. His voice didn't just make a comeback. It cut through pop culture like a ghost, singing from a vinyl grave. Then came the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Springsteen himself gave the speech. He called Roy one of the best, because he was. And it didn't stop there. That same year, something unreal happened. George Harrison pulled together the most casual supergroup in music history. Bob Dylan, Tom Petty, Jeff Lynne, and Roy, who joined as Lefty Wilbury, a quiet nod to his hero, Lefty Frizzell. What started as a B-side recording became Traveling Wilburys Volume 1, and Handle with Care blew the doors off expectations. Critics loved it. Fans couldn't get enough. And Roy, he was finally being seen, respected, and heard again. At the same time, he was deep into recording Mystery Girl, an album everyone now agrees was his strongest work in decades. Every public appearance showed a man renewed. He was smiling, alive, like the past no longer haunted him. But it did. Behind the scenes, Roy was pushing his body too hard. Extreme exhaustion, grief he'd never fully faced, and a pattern of yo-yo dieting all put massive strain on a heart that was already failing. Forensic pathologist Dr. Michael Hunter later confirmed what fans never saw. Roy was in trouble. He just didn't slow down. December 6, 1988. He was visiting his mother in Hendersonville when his heart gave out. Roy Orbison died at 52, just as everything was going right. And that's the Roy Orbison mystery finally solved. He formed a supergroup with legends. He gave the performance of his life, but his heart was quietly collapsing under the weight of it all. And the tragedy? It's not just that Roy Orbison died too soon. It's that the moment he finally had everything he'd fought so hard for, respect, legacy, even happiness, his body gave out. The Roy Orbison mystery is finally solved, and it isn't good. It's heartbreaking. Because maybe the real story isn't just about talent or timing. It's about how long someone can carry grief before it starts to carry them. So now the question is, was Roy's silence part of what made his music so hauntingly timeless? Or was it the very thing that slowly destroyed him?